author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special show, we are talking the Epstein files, illegal immigration, and a whole lot more. It's going to be quite the show. Please remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And you're on Liberty Nation Radio with your host, Mark Angelides. We're joined by Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent and satirist, Mr. Graham J. Noble. Thanks for joining us, Graham.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
So, Graham, the big hullabaloo that's been dogging the Trump administration for the last it's a good few weeks now is the Epstein saga, the Jeffrey Epstein saga. And it seems to me, and I'd like your analysis on this, because you've covered this whole saga on the page of LibertyNation.com so thoroughly that it seems to me that there's no external information. I mean, there could be coming out, of course, but it really encapsulates everything that's taking place. My conclusion from that is that this is a media-generated, quote, "we've got Trump this time" story, end quote. Graham, what's your take?
Well, I do think the Trump administration kind of, fumbled this one a little bit because after all, during the election last year, during the election campaign and also even in the early days of this administration, the American people were given the impression that this whole Epstein thing was going to get blown wide open, that, we were going to see the famous fabled client list. We were going to see all the documents and we were going to know who was involved. And then all of a sudden, first of all, they come out and say, well, this whole conspiracy about Jeffrey Epstein, not committing suicide. Yeah, that's nonsense. He did commit suicide, apparently, but which is what they're saying. I personally am still not convinced. And I'm sure a lot of people aren't either. But then, and then Pam Bondi's pretty much comes out and says, well, oh yeah, those files I said I had on my desk. What files were they again? And I'm sure, that must have upset a lot of people in MAGA world would have been very upset about that, because all of a sudden it's a big disappointment. But apparently the polls don't reflect any major. It's not like Trump supporters are suddenly just throwing in the towel and saying that's it, I'm done with Trump because of the Epstein thing. So
it's funny it's funny that you say that, because there is a pervasive story within the more left-leaning fourth estate that MAGA world is abandoning Trump because he led them on this wild goose chase regarding Epstein. But then Harry Enton of CNN pointed out, based on one of their polling, that it wasn't. They did what's your top issue with Donald Trump? And one respondent in the entire poll said the Epstein stuff was, and that's not 1%, as Enton pointed out. It was one person.
One person, yeah.
So I don't feel this is going to sink Donald Trump, but it does seem that it was a misstep that was so easily avoidable, and they tried to. And this is just opinion, of course, but it seems the Trump administration, including the president, tried to P.T. Barnum this whole thing, and they thought they could deliver something groundbreaking, and maybe it's just not the case, and they've kind of let everybody down with it. Now, fortunately, Trump's been keeping the let's say the news industry afloat with a lot of other things that are key for his supporters, but it really was a rare misstep, though, wasn't it? It was so out of character to be so off messaging and sort of dismissive of his base. It kind of surprised me in that.
I think it was really bad, and as you alluded to, Trump's own response to all of this was actually shocking, I thought. I mean, I think at one point he even said, look, if the people who are concerned about Epstein, I don't want those people as my supporters. It's have really,
that was almost a Clinton-esque mistake. Almost.
It was really bad. It was, I don't know what he was thinking when he said that. And true, look, the Epstein thing isn't the biggest issue we've got going on in America today. Not by a long shot, but nevertheless, this was a case of being, the Trump supporters were, basically Trump's team overpromised and underdelivered in a massive way. And I think it was really kind of shot themselves in the foot. I mean, of course, now the situation is that they've tried to backtrack it a bit. They've tried to do damage control by actually requesting that grand jury testimony is unsealed. And in fact, an Obama-appointed judge in Florida is the one who said, no, can't do that, not unsealing it. Which makes you wonder, the left loves to think that somehow, Trump is all intricately kind of tied into the whole Epstein sex crime thing, which of course, if he was, that stuff would have been out in the media years ago.
That's what.
And also, if he was,
about,
why did an Obama-appointed judge then not want to unseal this information if it was so damaging to Trump?
That's the thing that's so often overlooked. During Trump out of office, so January 19th, 2021, until he was back in office, January 20th, 2025. In all that time, pretty much every law enforcement agency you could shake a stick at was filing something against Donald Trump. I mean, he's been dragged through federal courts, through regional courts. He's had felonies attached to his name, 34, I believe, at the last count. And everybody was gunning for Donald Trump. And there was, and I'm almost certain the evidence is going to come out on this, that there was at least limited coordination and communication between the federal government and regional, like Manhattan prosecutors, because there were visits to the White House. I mean, that's on the record. Yeah. We don't know what was said at those, but they leave the White House and then all of a sudden they launch a case against Donald Trump. So I'm sure something will come out of that about that, or maybe not. Who knows? It probably disappears on Pam Bondi's desk. But there's this whole government to take down Donald Trump in the 4 years he's out of office. And nobody thought, we've got all these Epstein files, let's just leak it. It's unthinkable that such a thing didn't happen if they would be in any way tangentially damaging to Donald J. Trump. I'll give you the final word on this, Graham. Where do you think this is going from now onwards?
What surprises me about it, and I think the one thing that everyone really should be, it's a shame this has become politicized, because if the allegations against Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who's still sitting in a federal prison, despite apparently having trafficked underage girls to nobody, and that's
except Jeffrey Epstein. Except Jeffrey
Epstein, yeah. I think that's the big thing that we lose sight of, is that what we should really be wanting to know is who, other than Epstein, was involved in taking advantage of, abusing, or whatever these underage females. Yeah. And that's the tragedy of the story. It's not whether Trump was involved or whether Bill Clinton was involved or who else. That's the politics of it are irrelevant. We're talking about victims here of sex trafficking. Yeah. But apparently, other than Jeffrey Epstein himself, nobody else was involved at all. Which,
allegedly.
And I think that, so where does it go from here? Well, this is going to be the subject of various conspiracy theories for years to come yet, but I don't think we're actually ever going to maybe not get any more answers, or not for several years, until eventually this information probably will be unsealed and released to the public. And by then it may have been sanitized so much that, even then nothing will come out of it.
What is it? back to P.T. Barnum. He said, advertising is to a genuine article what manure is to land. It largely increases the overall product. Graham, we're going to be back with Graham after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Mr. Graham J. Noble. Thanks for sticking around, Graham. Now, you produced a fascinating piece on the page of libertynation.com that as soon as I read it, I thought, well, of course they are. It's an obvious head slap moment after the fact, and that is that there is a narrative forming around potential 2026 midterm results. Graham, fill us in.
Yeah, well, this one is a kind of the narrative du jour in the media, or it was anyway for a little while. And the backstory here, of course, is we've got midterm elections coming up next year. Now, generally speaking, almost always, in fact, the party in power, in other words, the party that has control of the White House, usually loses in the midterms. You know, they lose a whole bunch of seats, particularly in a president's first term. Well, kind of with Donald Trump, it's kind of weird.
It's his second first term, yeah.
It's his first term. It's kind of strange. So who knows if precedent holds? But even actually in presidents, I looked back over the numbers and over the midterm results for the last multiple election cycles, and actually even in a president's second term, usually his party will lose, will come up as the losers in the midterms. And there's only been a couple of exceptions to that. I think George W. Bush was
after 9/11.
I think Bill Clinton as well was an exception in his first term, I believe. But so anyway, that's the backstory, is that you would think, you know, kind of history tells us that the Democrats are going to pick up a lot of seats in the midterms. Republicans are going to lose a lot of seats. But the way things are going, I mean, the Democrats are just, their approval ratings are just in the tank right now. I believe
I'm just expanding that. Historic lows in pretty much every poll over the last, for each of these polling companies, they go back about 30 to 40 years. They're polling on this. Historic lows in all of them. Yeah.
And so here's the question. We could actually be looking at, you know, unless things change quite a bit within the next, 10, 12 months, we could be looking at I hate using the word unprecedented. It's not quite accurate, but we could be looking at it.
Yeah,
we could be looking at an uncommon shellacking at the polls for the Democrats next year. And I think they're already trying to think about, well, how do we mitigate that? You know, in the kind of in the public eye, how do we already kind of make the optics look not as bad for us? And so now they've come up with this all of a sudden. And that's why the reason why my title to my article you're talking about began with the words "got the memo," because as so often is the case, it suddenly seems that all the media outlets, all the left-leaning media outlets, are reporting the same story in the same way. And in this case, the message was, and I'm not sure how they think he's going to do this, but the message essentially was that Trump and the Republicans are going to rig the midterm elections. They're going to rig it. Now, I'm not entirely, as I said, I don't know quite the mechanics of how they would do that, but apparently, and also apparently, it's no longer shocking apparently to suggest that an election might get rigged.
Yes, yeah, that was that was enough to get you cancelled back in late 2021. Early 2021. But yes, so there's so much chatter going around that Donald Trump's trying to fix the election. And part of that seems to be the accusations of major gerrymandering taking place, as if as if the Republicans are the only party that have ever tried to make a seats safer for their core voters.
That's right. Yeah.
And of course, Gavin Newsom saying, "Well, if Trump and the Republicans gerrymander Texas, we're just gonna do it everywhere." But you've already been doing it everywhere. All these.
Well, that's the thing, Mark. See, that is the key right there. The way what you just said, because the Democrats, the reason why they're upset, and right now the only place Republicans are redistricting, and if you want to call it gerrymandering, that depends on your point of view, but where the Republicans are redistricting is in Texas. I mean, it's not like they're doing it in every one of the red states. But the thing is, the Democrats, they've already, states like Michigan have been already gerrymandered to the extreme. I mean, it's we're at the point where in some certain blue states, it's pretty much impossible for a Republican to win a seat in any congressional district in some of these states, because they've already been gerrymandered to the nth degree. And that's why I think the Democrats are panicking, because they're looking at Republicans doing some redistricting, and then they're thinking, well, how can we fight back? But they've already done all they can do. It's like, how do you redistrict anymore? It's like you've cut the cake into so many little slices now. You can't cut it anymore.
Crumbs, as Nancy Pelosi might say about anything really, except of course
that's right,
her trading bank book. So you've got this pervasive idea being pushed by a lot in the media. Also, some elected officials are talking about how that's some big name ones as well. But the fact is, if all of this redistricting or gerrymandering goes ahead, and Democrats still win, what does the narrative become? It's we were so successful, we overcame the cheating that took place. Is that the new narrative? And is there anybody in the country idiotic enough to buy that as a particular story?
Yeah, I think the way a lot of the left-wing media operates, they are so blatantly willing to just completely disregard what they were saying, a year ago, in order to say the opposite thing today because it suits them. And I think what you'll see, Mark, my view is that because of course you can't do that. You can't make all this hype about, the Republicans are going to rig the midterms, and then if the Democrats actually pick up more seats than the Republicans, yeah, exactly. What do they say? They're stumped. And what the media will do is the media will say, we simply never suggested that the Republicans were going to rig the midterms. What are you talking about?
It's we've always been at war with East Asia, and don't let your lying eyes tell you otherwise. But yes, we will see what happens, and please do go and read Graham's article on the page of LibertyNation.com. It's fantastic. Graham J. Noble, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're joining conversation with Liberty Nation's enterprise reporter, Joe Schaefer, who covers so many different beats, many of them with a globalist bent, which I find one of the most fascinating topics to cover, because it's really masquerading, Joe, isn't it? These globalist ideas are masquerading as mainstream thought when really they're quite outside the Overton window. And I think the one that's really taken root in the last, let's say, 6 or 7 years, maybe longer actually, let's be honest with it is illegal immigration. And while Trump now seems to have the US southern border under control, I mean, he's really got that under control. It's quite surprising that it's happened without actual legislation having to be put into place. We are still seeing an influx of illegal migrants coming in by boat. And I've forgotten the name of the agency. It's the U.S. Naval Institute said that something along the lines of illegal immigrant interdiction operations were in a state of emergency because people are just coming in by boat and they don't really know what to do about it because you can't man every. I mean, covering the southern border is tough enough, but covering the entire coastal regions of the United States is, I mean, it's an impossible task, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've written about that a couple times.
Yeah.
Florida and California has had a major problem with this. In California, they have these panga boats, I believe they're called, and they can just zip right in there and drop off these illegal aliens, and they're in the heartland. And of course, under the Biden administration, they really weren't making much of an effort to help the state. South Florida would have loved to have cracked down on it, but they weren't getting any federal help. So Trump has stressed that they're going to step up, this in California and Florida. And, again, we see California doesn't want to cooperate at all with the Trump administration. So that's an interesting battlefront. People are talking about Los Angeles and San Francisco. They should be talking about the coastline and, these blue, because you've got these blue radicals and these, fashionable towns on the California coast. They're welcoming these boats in. It's going to be another major headache for ICE. We've already got these protests in the cities. So, yeah, it is a major problem that has kind of gone under the radar when we're talking about this massive deportation operation.
Yeah, it's almost a backdoor way of facilitating illegal immigration. Boats turn up like San Diego and they just get off the boat. They disappear into the interior of the United States. Who knows who they are? Who knows where they're going? Who knows what their intentions are? And because it's not the kind of place that's really patrolled by anybody, because you can't due to the sheer size, it's the perfect entry point for people who wish the United States harm, because they know they're not going to encounter border patrol agents. They know that in certain locales they're going to get a welcoming blanket and a hot meal and be on your way, good sir. And then they wander off and who knows what they're doing. And this is of particular interest to me because I'm from the United Kingdom. And what we've seen over the last few years there is just a massive surge of what the media always terms asylum seekers, even though these are people that have traveled through numerous safe countries to France. And France is not at war. There's no good reason to be fleeing France, I might add. And then they embark on an admittedly dangerous journey across the channel in boats that are often unfit. And they get ashore, they get processed, they get put up in hotels, they get put up in houses of multiple occupancy, and strange new build barracks or things in small towns and villages across the United Kingdom. And it is really pushing Britons to the brink, made worse by the fact that just this last week, an online digital safety bill came into being, which was made law by the former Conservative government, the Tory party, and came into force this week past. And it was billed as this will stop children accessing pornography online. And what it actually did, as we've now seen, is it means that anybody sharing pictures of, for example, anti-illegal immigration protests, all these pictures get blocked out, and you have to verify who you are to look at the pictures. And at the same time, we hear that the government is setting up, I believe the term is, I might have this slightly wrong, but it's words to the effect of a crack police unit that will be looking for anti-illegal immigrant sentiment online. And it's almost as though the UK government doesn't want people complaining about people breaking laws to get into the United Kingdom. And it seems to me that the two stories, the US side and the UK side, they're both linked, they're similar, and it's for the same reasons.
It's funny. I tried not to smile when you were talking about a very, Orwellian and
Yeah.
unpleasant situation, but it's hard not to smile when you see them using the same playbook over and over again. They've done it my entire life. I was a child of the 70s and 1980s, and I saw it then. They say this is for your own good. They take something hideous like child pornography. We have to protect the kids. The Simpsons, the TV show, they would make this a running joke. The hysterical woman saying, "Won't somebody think of the children?" You use that line and you could do anything. You could absolutely do anything. So they use it. Hey, we got to protect these kids. Come up with this harsh, online censorship law, and now they are going to. My understanding is they have already arrested people for making anti-migrant comments on the internet. That's going on in this supposedly free United Kingdom right now. And so that the footprint, the way they got their foot in the tyrannical door, is saying we've got to protect kids from pornography. And then zoom, they go right for their globalist agenda. They've been doing it literally my entire life. I'm sure they've been doing it your entire life in the UK. And they use these cultural tools, weapons they've used it to great effect for decades. So why should they stop? There's no reason for them to stop.
The author and he's known as a big conspiracy theorist, very prolific author as well, I might add, David Icke. He calls it the totalitarian tiptoe, where they introduce something and move it several steps further along by using what he calls problem reaction solution. So there's a problem, or there's a problem that's created, and then the people people have the reaction, "Oh no, won't someone think of the children?" which is the desired reaction. And then they have a pre-packaged solution that just happens to infringe upon your individual rights, but people are clamoring for it, and it's a disaster from which there appears to be no stepping back. I think that's quite a tragic situation, that what liberties once given away are so rarely returned.
Yeah, I mean that's it in a nutshell. And I'm kind of biting at the chop to talk about in greater terms. We want to narrow the conversation to immigration, but it is just a total cultural weaponization against the citizens of a nation, and we see it over and over again. I think they know it's not convincing anybody anymore, which is why you're seeing it being more harsh, more tyrannical, more out in the open, punitive, because that's really the only card they have left at this point, is to scare people, to threaten them with jail time, et cetera, et cetera. They've lost the argument on immigration, in my opinion, and nation after nation, they've lost the argument. And now it comes, can they hold on to their fortress? Because there's no winning on their side anymore. They just want to keep trying to push something that the people of these countries do not want.
We're going to continue this conversation with Joe Schaefer after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. We're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation's enterprise reporter, Joe Schaefer. Thanks for sticking around, Joe. Now, we touched on this briefly in the last segment, but I kind of want to expand on it a bit, because there's been, and for me, it's kind of flown under the radar. People have put out a couple of, "Oh, look at Donald Trump, isn't he being silly" type articles in the left-leaning Fourth Estate, discussing rechanging the names of Washington, D.C. sport teams. But it's not a silly story, and it's not a silly behavior to try and bring something back to what it was when it's been destroyed or changed due to what's the best way to say this, Joe? An ideology that seeks to pattern itself on top of everything and say that this is the dominant thought process, when it's not really the case. It's a very elitist bubble thought process that's being put over the top of things. How do you see it?
There's a lot of ways we can go on this one. I call it deliberate demoralization, first of
Yeah.
all, because if you notice when they change these sports names, they always go to the lamest, most bland, dull name possible. That's not a coincidence. They take a beloved, cherished name. The Cleveland Indians, as Trump has said, was one of the original teams, going back to the 1890s, early 1900s. The Washington Redskins, an iconic NFL franchise, the Redskins Cowboys, a great rivalry, really captures your imagination. And so they want to dull your imagination. They want to pound you into blandness. Let's call them the Commanders, the lamest name we can come up with. Let's change the Indians to the Cleveland Guardians, which I guess is named after a bridge or something like that, icons on a bridge. Again, that appeals to nobody.
Yeah.
So that's not a coincidence. They want to dull it down. They want to demoralize you. But I also think they realize that this is a very potent weapon in their arsenal, the cultural arsenal. I just wrote an article. This is where you talk about globalism being interesting, fascinating, the psychological side of it. It's very important to them. So I wrote an article about populism is on the rise in Japan now because they're having the same problems that we're seeing in nation after nation in the West: immigration, suffering economy, the feeling that a corrupt government only serves itself. Well, as what I wrote up in the article is that the populist party that is on the rise specifically pointed out that multinational corporations are feeding globalism.
Yeah.
And so I quoted the leading cracker company in Japan, the CEO who was born in India, he wants more immigration to Japan, came out and said we need to hire less Japanese, we need to hire more foreigners because we just can't have Japanese employees in our increasingly global corporation. So he is backing up everything the Populist Party said. And again, this is like the Doritos of Japan. I don't even know I don't know Japanese culture well enough if but that's how popular they are. They are like a cultural icon in Japan. And so it's no mistake that they'll be part of this globalist cartel. You see it with Doritos is owned by Frito-Lay, which is owned by Pepsi. Pepsi was one of the worst woke companies of the past 10, 20 years. You see it with Guinness in Ireland, which is like the unofficial, official alcoholic beverage of Ireland, or one of them. They're owned by Diageo, a multinational corporation. For years have pushed globalism on Ireland and the world. The most woke stuff. They are one of the worst companies, and they own so many companies around the world. So this isn't a coincidence you see in Ireland, Japan, America. I'm sure you can point out examples in England of beloved cultural, sports, entertainment institutions repurposed for the globalist propaganda mantra.
It's even worse in the United Kingdom. We've had elected politicians in high positions say that they're offended by seeing the flag of England being flown, and it is demoralizing. You're right. There's this concerted effort to make people either turn away from symbols that used to matter, or denigrate the symbols that used to matter, because you can't build a new world order if the old world order's still standing, Joe. It just doesn't work. You've got to break down the foundations of it. Now, let's dive a little deeper into this, what's happening in Japan, because it's actually quite fascinating. Now, we have seen across Western countries, Europe, the United States, we have seen the rise of populists, and it's quite apparent. It's the growing political ideology of the day. I think it is a more populist bent towards politics, but we didn't expect to see that in somewhere like Japan. That from the outside looking in, it's always been this is a very staid, a very conservative monoculture, as it were. But it's true, they are having the same globalist problems, and it's driven in part by multinational corporations that want to see the samification. I think I've just made up that word, but I love it. The samification of the world. So no matter where you go, you see the same shops, you can buy the same pair of shoes. And politicians who look to globalist enfranchisement as the way of the future. And I think it was Bertrand Russell who wrote that socialism is the only way forward, and the only way to do that is by having a one world government. And sure, a lot of people tried it after Bertrand Russell wrote about it, and that's what led to 100 million deaths. But and I don't blame Bertrand Russell, of course. But we see it with politicians. They want things more global. They're not interested in the national. Corporations are the same. They want things global. They're not interested in the national. What do the people want?
Yeah, I was interesting. I can't even pretend to be an expert on Japan at all. A lot of this was new to me. But as you said, I've been writing about globalism for so long. So you go into it was literally like going into a new country for me, already knowing the playbook, that they roll out. So it's like, okay, what am I looking for here? An entrenched, increasingly unpopular government trying to hold on to power that they've had for decades that they feel slipping away. And what else am I looking for here? The powerful corporate interests who want to go global. And I found them both right away. I could have written a 10,000 word article on that. You guys don't like that when I write that much.
We prefer them a little shorter, just a little shorter.
I got to hit stop, but there's just so much material. So let's go with Japan. You talk about a uniparty, and I did not know this at all. The ruling construct in Japan has been in power for 65 out of the past 69 years. I mean, that's just insane. That's crazy. And so that came up with the idea that the Japanese were satisfied with their government. Well, they were satisfied when they had a booming economy for, decades after World War II, but that's been gone for a while now. And the Japanese people feel that the economy today, which is going global, which is thinking global, is not concerned with the Japanese people. And so they have the same problems that you see in America and Europe, where prices are rising, the people can't afford it. They have a demographic crisis, the birth rate crisis, and they've got politicians, these same politicians that just want to hold on to power, saying, and the corporations saying, I've got the solution, more immigrants. Let's bring more people in. And there's people of the country, Japan, Europe, America, are saying, what about us? Why don't we have a government that takes care of us? But the first thing they hear from their politicians and their big corporate leaders is, we need to bring in others. Others to feed, to keep feeding the monolith that they control, but that the people feel doesn't serve them at all. So why should they be invested in this monolith that they don't care about anymore? And so that's the tension. You're seeing it in nation after nation. It's really not a surprise that it would happen in Japan. I'm surprised people are so surprised, because the entire formula, all the ingredients that we've seen in Europe and America are absolutely there in Japan.
Yeah, it's a cut and paste form of globalism. Put the things, take it from here, you can apply it over there. And when you hear that there's a populist party on the rise, you can almost guarantee that, all right, let's look at the factors contributing to it. And as you say, it always seems to be the problem to all of the globalist issues is they say, we need more immigration. It's almost as though that's their driving force. Joe Schaefer, I want to thank you for coming in, talking with us. Audience, please do go and check out Joe's writings over at libertynation.com. They are eye-opening. Thanks for being here, Joe.
Thank you.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests for today, Graham J. Noble and Joe Schaefer, and of course extend my thanks to you, the audience, for tuning in each and every week here on the Radio American Network. You are appreciated. Please do remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.